Welcome to Beginning Genealogy. My name is Ellen Anderson, and I'm a local and family history librarian at the St. Joseph County Public Library. Our objectives for this session are to introduce some genealogy methods and tools that you can use to get started on your first genealogy project. Our second goal is to help build your confidence with getting started with a project. And then finally, to increase awareness of library resources and services for genealogists and the materials that we offer. So today we're going to follow 3 steps. We're going to start by ready, set, go. 3 simple steps to get started on your first genealogy project. So the first thing we need to do is get ready. We talk about sometimes building, a solid house needs a good foundation, or to build a good house, we need to build the foundation. But before we can build that foundation, we need to gather some bricks. So that's going to be our first step, is to gather the bricks and get them all in one place so that we can get working on building that foundation and then our beautiful house. So the first thing that I want to suggest is to, rather than thinking about starting with doing research, think about starting with what you already know. So the first thing I suggest is to brainstorm what you know. You could do this in a list, you could do this in a mind map if you think more that way. You could use notes on a computer or on a piece of paper, whatever you prefer, just trying to get information out of your head and into words. So thinking about just putting down in any order, in any way you want to do it. You don't need any kind of fancy way of listing things. Just get names of relatives down. If you can make notes about how those people are related to each other. People that even you remember, but you don't know their full names, or you don't have a full picture of what their identity was because you don't have solid memories of them. Or even details that you heard about in family stories, but can't tie to a specific person. Like, your great-grandmother came from Ireland, but you don't know what her name was, or, where she fits of your great-grandparents. So then once you've gotten down everything that you have in your head, then it's time to look outside your head for information that you might have elsewhere in your house. Look for things that have been passed down through your family, that you've inherited, that family file, that box that contains things that you might be able to make use of to gather bricks. Birth, marriage, and death certificates are great, and a lot of times original certificates can make their way through families. Same with obituaries, often get clipped and kept with funeral programs and things like that. Family photos, checking the back for any kind of notes on family. Looking for a family Bible, often in the beginning or between the New and Old Testaments, there will be pages to record family information. So it can be good to look in there. And then any other kind of record. Maybe you were lucky enough to end up with some kind of immigration certificate or some other, family journal, diary, just anything that might have information that you didn't remember that is on paper somewhere. And once you've exhausted everything that you have access to in your house and your family, the next place to go is outside the family. Or outside your immediate family. Talking to relatives is a really, really great way to kind of crowdsource information about your family that people might already know. So I think about looking into talking to the older generation, if at all possible. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles are great sources of information, but I know that it's not always possible to access someone in the older generation. So if you don't have that opportunity, or you've made use of that opportunity already and you're looking for more, think about people in your own generation who might have had different information than you did. Siblings and cousins might have been, in the right place at the right time to hear a certain story, or might have spent time with different relatives than you did, or had different types of relationships with different relatives than you did. So they can be good sources. And also sometimes people just remember different things. So maybe you forgot about that story that you and your siblings heard from your grandparents. So just kind of crowdsourcing information from as many people as you can just add to the pile of data points that you have to get started with. During these conversations, I recommend that you just listen and take notes as much as possible. Let the other person do the talking. You want to avoid prompting too much, because when you offer your suggestions or your memories, I mean, that's part of having a conversation. We always want to, give and take, contribute. But if you do too much prompting, you can kind of taint the memories. So just let the other person talk, and afterward you can compare notes with what you had brainstormed or what you remembered, and maybe that gives you a jumping off point of something you want to research, a place where your memories and someone else's memories differ, or maybe something that they thought was different than you did. So just let them talk, and you can always come back if you have questions later, or if you find some information you want to share later that you think you've kind of proved or disproved. And then just asking them about things that are kind of even beyond their own personal memories. So asking about the relatives that, maybe are in the far reaches of their memories that they didn't necessarily know, but they heard stories about. What stories were passed down to them that you can, reach back as many generations as you have access to. And then finally, you can do that comparison to your own brainstorm and point out the places where, someone else's recollections differ from yours. And maybe that will give you a good mystery to start working on. So once we've done as much of that brainstorming, crowdsourcing as we possibly can, we need to take all that data and we need to organize it, because this is where we're taking the bricks and building the foundation. So getting it all organized will give you a solid starting point. It will give you a good sense of what you have and what's missing, maybe a good sense of which mysteries you want to start chasing first, and help you not duplicate your work when you already have information that you're certain about. So there are 3 types of forms that genealogists like to use in doing their research. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to a handout, which will also be in the video description if you're watching this later. And the handout provides these 3 forms that are on the screen, and I'm going to go through each one and how to use them. So there's the link to that handout. And it's a big packet, so we're going to talk about the other parts of it later on in the presentation. But the first 3 things I want to talk about are these 3 charts. So these are the 3 main types of charts and record keeping methods that genealogists use in their work. So these charts can take lots of different forms. There are many free versions that look a little bit different from each other out there on the internet. These are just the 3 that we like to use here in LFH, but certainly they're no better than any other options out there. And then also, if you ever look at like genealogy websites that have tools to build family trees, or software programs that build family trees, even though they look different than these charts, they still rely on these main functions of how they organize the information. So we're going to go over these 3, and then no matter what tools you choose to use to keep your records in, you'll know how they function and what their purpose is. So the first one is an ancestral chart, or a pedigree chart, as it's often known. And these are ways of recording direct ancestor information. So they can be used to record how generations are related to each other, but only in direct descendants. You see that there's no places on here for listing siblings and things like that. We're just trying to tie direct ancestors to each other. So the way that you would use this chart is you start with yourself on that far left line there, and then the details below that are good to fill in, but they're mostly just to help differentiate between people and to provide kind of a reference point for where this person was in time and space. But they're not really meant to be the main place you record biographical details. Really, it's those lines connecting people that we're concerned about. So you can put yourself on the first line on the left, and then you would put your parents on the next 2 lines. Traditionally, men are listed on the top line and women on the bottom lines of each pair. And then you can continue that. You see on here, you can add your parents, your grandparents, and then there's spaces for great-grandparents, but no room for biographical information. And that's because these charts are meant to stack. So I can start with this chart and I can continue out to infinity number of charts, as long as I have generations to record information about. So how might we link something like that together? So if I were to fill this out with information, these spaces aren't numbered, but we kind of think of them in these charts as being numbered. So the first line would be 1, and then you would count, the father is the next count, the mother is the following count, and then it moves back up to the top of the chart. So if I wanted to continue this chart out further, I would start by identifying this as page 1. You see that orange 1 in the corner. This is chart number 1. So if I reference this chart anywhere else in my record keeping, I would refer to number 1 if I wanted to refer back to this page. And you see on the left, there are some details about person number 1, so that's yourself, on this chart is the same as person number whatever on another chart. This would be, if this was a linked chart, I might identify, what chart this is linked to. And then chart number, where does this chart jump off from? So for example, if I wanted to continue out information about this great grandparent, number 8 at the top, I might identify them as being continued on chart number 2. And then let me give an example of a chart number 2. So now you can see that we're on a different numbered chart. At the top, it says 2 now. It says that person number 1 on this chart, that great grandparent we wanted to record information about, is the same as person number 8 on chart number 1. If I go back to chart number 1, person number 8 is that same great grandparent. I don't have a name here, but if I did, John Smith would be the same as John Smith here on this line. And so you can use that system of numbering, linking and numbering to work out to have as many charts as you want. Now, a lot of people like this type of record keeping system. I find this gets really cumbersome really quickly because of having to have so many pieces of paper and having to flip back and forth, numbering them and identifying numbers of people and all kinds of things. So I like to use this more as a tool for a single research session, more like a scratch page to put notes on. And then I might take it and transcribe it into a digital tool like software or a website that can help make it more seamless to link many generations together. But fundamentally, this is the same type of thing that you can do on Ancestry when you make a family tree. You put information about people and you link the generations together. That's what we're trying to get out of a chart like this. So the next type of chart that you can use to record information is, this is more like a personal profile. We call this a family group sheet or a family group record. And this is where you put all of the other types of biographical information that didn't really have a place on that pedigree chart. So you can see here we have spaces for a husband and a wife. We have all kinds of biographical details about them. In the bottom half of the page, we have room for all kinds of information about their children. You could certainly then take some of those children and give them their own family group sheet if you want to continue research on them. But if you don't continue research on them, at least it's here. And you can do things like at the top, you can identify which ancestral chart that person is on if you're using paper records. In a computerized form, this would take the place of like a personal profile. If you've ever taken a look at an ancestry tree, every individual has a profile with personal details and personal timeline events. This is kind of what that replicates. And the last type of chart is something that I think is highly underutilized by most genealogists out there, and that's a research log. It's the least fun part of doing genealogy, but it's a really important part of doing genealogy that we're going to talk about more later on. But that is making note of what you're researching, where you look, and what you find. And that serves a lot of different purposes. One purpose is when you find something, you know where you found it. So you can always go back to it, or someone else could go back to it if they want to kind of check your work. And another point is to prevent you from duplicating work. So if you look in a certain place and you don't find anything, you don't want to go back in a year and look there again. That would be duplicating your work. So a research log can help with both of those cases, when you do find something and when you don't find something. And again, this can take the form of a computerized format. A lot of software programs and online tree programs will have a place to list the source of your findings. And a lot of them will have some kind of notes feature where you could record a negative result that you searched somewhere and didn't find something. So that's another way you can do that. But these three things, so a pedigree chart, a family group sheet, and a research log, are kind of the main three types of ways that people record research. And as long as you find a way to record those three types of things that you like, whether that's on paper, on a different type of paper format, or on a computerized format, like a software program or a website, you can make sure that you have all the records you need for your genealogy. So once you're ready to start searching, there's a lot of resources out there, and it can be overwhelming to decide which ones do you need to use, which ones do you need to learn how to use, and then how do you even start using them? So I'm going to go over some of the resources. I'm going to focus on mainly things that the library can offer, and then I'll touch on things that you might pursue on your own, whether that's because they're just websites you can access from home or paid subscription sites. So let's start with things you can use from home. There are library databases out there that are really, really helpful for doing genealogy, and I recommend looking into them. With your library card, you can do a lot of work from home. You don't even have to come to the library or leave the comfort of your home to do. There are a lot of free websites out there, and learning about what those are and how to make the most use of them is really, really valuable. And then there are paid websites, and it's good to know what the options are and how to make the most of them, so that if you are going to invest money into doing genealogy research, that you know that you're going to get something out of it and really get the most out of your hard-earned dollars going towards those websites. So, and then the final thing I always have to plug is you don't have to just do research online. There's a lot of offline work out there, and it becomes harder and harder in genealogy with more and more being online to kind of remember that there is so much still that's not online, not digitized, not indexed, not searchable. And learning about how to locate those things, what exists, where it exists, and who knows about it and can help you with it is really valuable. And libraries are a great place for that. So here are some of the library databases that you can access from home with your library card. Ancestry Library Edition is the biggest one. Normally, Ancestry Library Edition is only available when you come to the library. Any library location has access to it, and you don't need a library card when you come to a library location at SJCPL. But until December 31st, Ancestry and ProQuest, their distributor partner, have been really, really generous in letting us make that available from home with a library card until December 31st. So you still have a few months to take advantage of the opportunity to use Ancestry Library Edition from home to do your research. That is a really great resource to use. Ancestry Library Edition, I put the emphasis always on the Library Edition because even though Ancestry has the same name as Ancestry Library Edition and they look the same, they do have a little bit different features when you use it as an individual user versus when you use it as a library user. So as a library user, you can access records. You can access records from all over the world, but what you can't access is family trees that other people have made and a family tree that you make yourself. So you can do that as a free account on Ancestry without the library edition version. You can sign up for an Ancestry account and make a tree. You just won't be able to access records on there without paying. So a lot of times what I know people like to do is pull up their personal account in another window or another tab or another monitor. They pull up the library edition and they just do the research in the library edition and then record their findings in their own personal tree. So sometimes using those side by side is a good thing to do. Heritage Quest is kind of a brief version of Ancestry that's available from home with a library card all the time. It has a very, very, very limited selection of records from Ancestry that you can access from home. And if you know how to use Ancestry, it'll feel very familiar to you because the design of the site is very, very similar. And the viewer is the same, so you'll be familiar with all the functions. They have a few things like Census records is a big one. And then a few other little things, some limited maybe vital record collections, some limited military research collections, but mainly it's a good way to access the census from home if you like the viewer that Ancestry has. Fold3 and newspapers.com are both other sites that are owned by Ancestry, so they'll also feel very familiar to people who like Ancestry. Fold3 focuses on military records, and newspapers.com is, of course, newspapers. Both of those we have library version access to that are available from home with a library card. Again, newspapers.com is another one that I point out has a library edition that's very different from the individual version. So if you're trying to do research in the library edition and you don't find anything, that doesn't mean that having an individual account or individual subscription to it wouldn't be useful. The titles they offer us as a library are actually different than the titles they offer to individual subscribers. And that just has to do with how newspapers license their content for libraries. Then two other sites, these are free from home and free from anywhere. You don't need a library card. These are our obituary index. If you're doing local research, we have an index to obituaries published in St. Joseph County newspapers. We're always adding to that. We have volunteers that help us with entering current Tribune obituaries, as well as obituaries from other historical newspapers as we work through some of our collection. And then Michiana Memory, I have to point that out. It's a really fun website, especially if you have local ties. It's just digital collections from the library's collection and some things that we have partnered with other institutions or individuals to put online. So scanned books and newspapers and photographs and other types of materials from our collections and our partner collections that we host online. And it's fully searchable. And we just put out our big collection of 10,000 photos from the South Bend Tribune from about the 50s through the 90s. So really fun collection if you've got local family and just want to learn more about what South Bend was like at different times. In addition to library websites, there are also free websites that are available from home anytime to anyone. And we like to promote some of them because we think they're really, really useful resources. The biggest one is familysearch.org. Family Search feels like it's a competitor to Ancestry.com, although they don't really compete because Family Search is a nonprofit organization. It's a website produced by the LDS Church to support family history research. They have a lot of records. They have a huge initiative to digitize old historical records and preserve them. So there's lots to find there. I will caution that they do have an online tree building tool, but unlike other websites that provide family tree building tools, Family Search operates on more of a Wikipedia style, where they call it the one family tree, and you simply edit a part of it. So be careful using that as your primary place to record your family research, because you won't be the only one that's able to edit that. But it is a good place to find leads and see what other people are working on in relation to your relatives. Find a Grave is a crowdsourcing website for identifying information about burial sites. You can find pictures there sometimes. Some people take the time to write short biographies. So if you are interested in visiting local cemeteries for your family, where your family's buried, you might want to take on being kind of the contributor for information about your family on that website. Chronicling America is a national initiative to digitize historical newspapers, and then Hoosier State Chronicles is Indiana's contribution to Chronicling America. Both are great websites, have lots of really great newspapers, totally free and easy to search. There are other collections. I pointed out Michiana Memory, but there's things like American Memory and Indiana Memory. Lots of states, lots of communities have their own digital collection site. So if you have ancestors from somewhere other than St. Joseph County, you might look into if there are any digital collections available from state libraries, local libraries, universities. I never underestimated underestimate the power of Google to find information about your family. A well-constructed Google search has broken down more than one brick wall for me, so always worth a try. And then I have to plug also the South Bend Area Genealogical Society is a great resource if you have St. Joseph County ancestors. They have a lot of online indexes that can really help with locating ancestors in some difficult record collections, and great programs as well. There are also other subscription websites that you might consider subscribing to. Of course, this hobby can get very expensive very quickly, so I would make sure that you are subscribing only to sites that are going to be useful to you, and only as long as they are going to be useful to you. I know some people like to strategize how they allocate their subscription dollars. Some people just subscribe to a single website maybe for a month or two while they really heavily do research in it, and then they let that lapse and they go back to researching something else on a different site. Or sometimes people alternate between subscribing to different websites, or some people just kind of plan out, if they're visiting a library that has access to one of these sites, because most of these have a library version of some kind. Some people kind of just plan out when they're visiting a library for other purposes. Oh, they happen to have access to that one subscription site that you wanted to look into, and maybe spend an hour just poking around in there when you're at the library. Ancestry.com is a big one. They provide records, and each of these sites has a different specialization when it comes to geography and record types. So Ancestry specializes in mainly US research, and also pretty strong in Canadian research, although I don't do a lot of Canadian research personally. But it's strong in both of those areas. And then they've got a little bit from other places. So it's a good one if you have a lot of US research to do. Find My Past is very much focused on UK research and British Isles research. So if that's more where your ancestors are from, you might look into that one. My Heritage is a little bit more focused on kind of the continental Europe and other places in the world. They have records from all over the world that kind of don't have a strong home in other sites. And then there are two main newspaper sites. There are actually a lot more newspaper sites out there. The thing about newspaper sites is that every site has different agreements with different newspapers. So it's hard to say that there's one site that's better than another overall. It's more a matter of which site has the newspapers that are relevant to your ancestors' communities. And that goes for all of these sites. They're going to have different records and different search tools and different agreements, different licenses for different content. And every single site that you ever have the option to subscribe to almost certainly has a way to see what contents they hold without paying for a subscription. So that's something I very much recommend if you're considering subscribing to a website, but you're unsure how relevant the content will be to you. Look for a list of titles, a list of holdings, and just browse through and make sure that it's going to be relevant to your research before you put any money towards it. And that's in newspapers, that's a big one because it's kind of hit or miss. Every site has different newspapers. And then, of course, visiting a library. Once you've kind of gotten through a lot of the online stuff, I really recommend that you look for opportunities to visit libraries, whether it's here or whether it's a library relevant to the places your ancestors lived. Most libraries will offer things like history and genealogy books. They'll offer magazines of some sort, usually. A lot of them will have newspapers and other records that are on microfilm. Many will have information on their website. Maybe they'll have indexes that can save you time, or finding aids that can help you understand what they hold, or guides that can help you kind of plan out your research. A lot of them will offer databases. Usually, like I said, I don't think databases are a great use of my time if I'm going on a trip to a library specifically. But sometimes I'll make note if they have an unusual database and I don't have any other way to access it. So look for all those things before I visit a library. And the biggest thing, of course, is making sure they're going to be open when you visit. So even though their website may have their hours listed, it's always a good idea to reach out to the library, give them a call or send them an email, make sure they're going to be open that day and there's not some crazy special event, festival, parade in front of the library that's going to close the library for the day. Always good to make sure that they're going to be open when you're visiting. And then also that can be an opportunity for them to make suggestions for you of how to plan your time, or if they have records they recommend that you look into, or maybe they say, actually, we don't have a lot of genealogy, but if you go to the next town over, they have a big collection relevant to our town. So just a good opportunity to interact with staff and, see if they have any suggestions for you. They may not, but if they do, that's a good opening for them to provide that. If you do plan to visit a library, you might want to think ahead about what you're going to take with you. Not all of these things may be relevant to you, but some of them might be. Think about how you like to record your research and how you like to operate when you're doing research. You might think about taking a laptop. You might think about taking a flash drive, change for copies, notebook, pencils, or however you like to record things. And then I always like to plan out my research ahead of time. I might look through their catalog and their website and if they have any guides, and kind of prioritize my list of what I want to accomplish while I'm on that visit. It's very, very easy to get just distracted by browsing. So I like to make sure that I stay on task. Libraries are a great place to visit, but there's more than just libraries even. There are other repositories that hold original records that you might need to access. They may not be indexed. They may not be on microfilm at the library. You might need to go to the original source. So archives, county archives, university archives, county courthouses are great places to find things like wills, probate records, deeds, vital records, divorce records, guardianships, all kinds of records that provide a lot of information about your ancestors' lives can be found in original form in a big old record book in an archive or a courthouse. So good to keep those in mind when you're trying to do research that it may not be online. You may need to go to the source. So I've listed a ton of resources, of websites and other suggestions of places to find information, but how do you go about using that information? Where do you start? What's the process? So I'm going to try to break it down into very specific steps as much as I can. So here is, I think, the most basic form of the research process. I start by taking that original information that I brainstormed and then recorded onto a pedigree chart and a family group sheet. And now I've got that foundation of my house. And the first thing I need to do is verify the facts that I have. Just having it in my head is not verifiable proof that my grandparents got married in a specific town on a specific date. Unless I had the marriage certificate in my family records, I might start by looking for that marriage certificate, or I might start by looking, requesting a death certificate or a birth certificate, especially if you're thinking recently. I like to start by verifying the easy stuff, the low-level, low-lying things, the recent things where that there's probably statewide record keeping. We're not going back into a time where things are, maybe weren't recorded as thoroughly or as consistently. We're talking about, the last couple generations are probably going to have statewide records for vital events, birth, marriage, and death. So I like to start by doing things like requesting those records, proving them. And that helps you get a sense of the research process and the process of, requesting records, or the process of taking a record and transferring it into fact on a tree, or supporting the facts with evidence of those records. So start by it feels like the unfun stuff because it's stuff you already know. You're not solving a mystery by confirming that your grandparents' marriage or birth or death was as you think it is. But that is a really great place to start. The next step, once you've kind of shored up that foundation with verifying those facts that you have by pulling records that provide evidence, Then study those records and see what information they include that you were not trying to prove. So that marriage record may list the birthplaces of your grandparents. Maybe I hadn't thought about that. Maybe that's a new thread to pull. Or maybe that birth record lists the parents' names, and maybe you knew about the child, that child is your grandmother, but you weren't really sure about her parents' names. Now you've got new information that you can continue to pursue. So I always start by, the fact that you were pulling that record for, then read the whole thing very, very thoroughly. Every, box check, every mark probably has a purpose. Figure out everything that you can learn from that record. What's new? What are you unsure about that record proposes? And then start formulating a new question. So maybe that marriage certificate lists your grandmother's birthplace and you hadn't thought about that. Well, I don't know if that marriage record is the most reliable information about her birth. What other records could you use to find information about her birth? Maybe you can look for a birth certificate. Maybe you can look for information about her birth in a newspaper. Maybe you can look for other records where she had to list her birthplace, for education or occupation purposes, or immigration purposes. So formulate a new question and figure out where you might go to find that information. Find those records that provide evidence for that new question that you posed. And that process continues. So every time you find a record, it probably answers the question you were looking at initially, but it probably provides 5 or 10 jumping off points to new questions, new information that you can look for. And that's kind of the process. You verify the fact at hand with a record, study that record, look for a fact that's new to you, and start pulling the thread. And that every time you pull a record or answer a question, you can create new questions. And that is what builds a family tree. So when you're trying to undertake this process online, especially, it can be hard to get used to searching in databases. So I always say that less is more when you're searching online. A lot of records in our history were very, very sparse. They might have only included a person's name and a date. When you think that you've got 10 empty fields in a search box in front of you on Ancestry that asks you 10 different questions, it's really tempting to fill out all the information in the search form. But less is more. Start with maybe a name and a date, a name and a place and a date, and incrementally refine that search. There are going to be fields on Ancestry that ask you about, a person's spouse and a person's children, and the date of their birth and the date of their death and the date of their marriage and the place they lived. It can be tempting to add all that information, but I would just start with as little as possible and add more as you need to narrow it down. Try the same search on a variety of websites. Even if they have the same information, the search algorithm they build to comb through that information will be different. So you will get different results. And that can be very, very helpful, especially when they transcribed the data themselves. So for example, Ancestry and Family Search both take original census records and have other people transcribe them. Ancestry hires people to transcribe them. Family Search crowdsources volunteers to transcribe them. Both have their pros and cons, but they both might lead to different results when the handwriting is hard to read. So searching a variety of websites is very useful, and getting used to wildcards. Wildcards are very helpful in genealogy, especially when you're searching for unusual names. An asterisk can replace multiple characters, and a question mark replaces a single character. Not every single genealogy website supports the use of wildcards, but it's good to try them out and figure out which sites do and don't, because they can be very, very helpful, especially when you're thinking about around South Bend. There's a lot of Polish names that are hard to spell or change spelling over time. Those can be good tools for kind of unraveling some of those difficult names. Speaking of difficult names, be flexible with your spelling, be flexible with your dates. Names were very fluid in their spelling before things like Social Security came around, and identities became very fixed in how they were spelled and how things were written. It wasn't always that way. So this is just an example from a couple branches of my tree. Lots of creative spellings. And I can't say for certain that any one of these is the correct spelling because it changed so much. So get comfortable with, things being fluid. It's always a guessing game. I always think about the fingerprint. I don't need every single line to match up, but if enough data points match up, that's probably the right person I'm looking for. When you're getting started with genealogy, there's a lot of different types of records out there, and it can be hard to know which ones to focus on. So these are the ones I recommend because these are, one, easy to find generally when they exist, and they're pretty easy to get a hold of online. So census records are my number one for US genealogy research. Census records were taken by the government. They were taken every 10 years. They started in 1790, and they are publicly available right now up until 1940. The 1950 census will be available in a few months. The 1890 census is the only one that is missing completely. It was lost, although some of the early ones are missing in certain states. But they're available all over the internet because they are public record at this point. All the public ones are public record. So they're on Ancestry, they're on Family Search, they're on Heritage Quest, they're probably on 10 other websites. And they're great because they were very thorough in how they were collecting names. So there's a very almost certain chance that if your ancestors were in the US, they're probably in the census somewhere every time it was taken. And also these were government records. So they're not church records, for example, that were subject to different religious practices. These were a public government record, so they applied to everyone. So censuses are great. That's the first thing I look for when I'm starting research on a person. Every time they appeared in a census when they were alive, I need to find it. The great thing about census is that they describe every single member of a household. They may include, not for every year, for every person, but they may include things like someone's name, age, place of birth, occupation, number of children, even their parents' place of birth, their naturalization status, their family relationships, lots of information about a household. Vital records are another big one. The big three are the birth, marriage, and death certificates. If you have ancestors who lived in Indiana, you're very lucky because Ancestry has a lot of Indiana records, Indiana vital records. They've got birth certificates since they started keeping them up through 1940. They've got marriage certificates that are more recent, and they have death certificates in a very wide range of time. So I highly recommend, if you've got Indiana ancestors, get on Ancestry and start looking through those records. Headstones are a good one to look for. They don't tend to include a large amount of information, but it's a good practice to know how to locate cemeteries and where people are buried. That can lead to other records, like contacting the cemetery office and finding the burial record, which may have more biographical information, or looking into like a funeral home record or something like that. But it's a good practice to get into to locate your ancestors' burial site on Find a Grave when you get a chance. Find a Grave is a good one because it's free and it's crowdsourced, so you can always help contribute and improve the information there. If you don't find someone in Find a Grave, you might look into other ways to find information about the cemetery. Some cemeteries have a website. Some are indexed at a library. For example, local cemeteries in St. Joseph County are indexed at our library in books. So that's a great place to look. Obituaries are not always the most reliable source of information, but they often have a lot of biographical details, which can really enrich information about an ancestor or provide great leads on new mysteries. So places you can find obituaries locally, we have an obituary index that our staff and volunteers maintain. SBAGS also has, the South Bend Area Genealogical Society also has indexes to some small portions of papers that are not in our index. If you have ancestors who were not local to this area, newspapers.com and other types of newspaper sites, free and paid, are good places to look. Like I said, it's just kind of a matter of which website has the license to the paper you want, or the paper where your ancestors lived. So figuring that out and taking a look there is great. Especially when you're on sites like Ancestry or Family Search, or any other kind of big website that provides family trees online. I really recommend that you view those critically. Be cautious about accepting their claims, because anyone can put anything on a family tree and it doesn't necessarily make it true. So it can be a great lead for, suggesting a new avenue of research or connecting with a cousin because they put a tree online, but I don't take those at face value. Always verify the research by trying to figure out what sources they reference and then follow those sources yourself. When you do find something, say you're looking on Ancestry and you find a record, what should you do with it? So the first thing you want to do is to study the whole document. If you're looking at an index, see if there's a way to look at the image of the document or the original document. Always want to work from the most original and complete source you can. So an index is great to find it, but see if you can find the original document. Make sure that when you're looking at that document, you download or print a copy for your records. The holdings on websites change all the time, and what you found today, you might not be able to find again tomorrow, or might have disappeared in a few months, or maybe the license agreement ended and it's gone. So download or print a copy for your own records so that you're not reliant on that website to keep the information for you. And then at that point, you can set about upgrading or updating your information, those pedigree charts, those family group sheets, or that online tree, if that's what you're using. And then you also want to make sure that you record the source, because if anyone at any point, whether it's you forgetting how you found that and needing to check your own work, or whether someone else comes along and says, I don't think that's right, I want to check your work, or maybe you're comparing notes with a cousin or something, and you want to verify each other's work, you'll need to know where you found it. So having information is a source for that information is very helpful. You don't need to feel intimidated. This is not a school term paper. This is not, you're not publishing a book. So you don't need to cite a source by any particular format. You don't need to follow any kind of citation guidelines. All you need is enough information for you to find it again. So that probably includes writing down in any format you want to, the title, the author, the publisher, the date it was published, and some kind of pointer to where in the resource it was, a page number, a chapter, or something. Any way you can record that information that will help you find it again is what you need. If it's a website, you'll want to know what website it was and at least the date and time you accessed it. If you can get more details, like, is there a name of a collection, or some kind of search term special search term you use that helped you find it. Those can be also helpful, but minimum address and date time. And then if it changes in the future, at least you know that it's because, the holdings changed. And then at this point, you've figured out what resources to use. You've got an approach to conducting your research, and you know what to do with records when you find them. Now it's time to go about broadening your skill set. Think about how you can expand on your genealogy skills and learn more that will help you do your research. So reading a book on a specific skill or topic, we've got a whole aisle of those in LFH. Attending a webinar. Genealogy webinars are a huge industry. There are hundreds of them every week on the internet. So if you are interested in learning more, there are lots and lots of people out there who are teaching classes online. Taking a class like at the library or from the South Bend Genealogical Society. They offer meetings with educational classes. Attending conferences. Genealogy conferences are a huge thing. There are lots of them. They're usually state level and national level conferences. Joining a genealogical society is a great way to connect with other people who are doing research. and support, local educational opportunities. And then exploring software programs. Maybe you also get to a point where keeping your research on paper is becoming overwhelming and you're ready to switch to an online or a software program. There are lots of them out there, and lots of education about how to use those. I do want to point out Roots Tech is a free genealogy conference put on by Family Search. They are focusing on the last year and this year. Typically, it's an in-person conference held in Salt Lake City, but last year and for 2021 and 2022, excuse me, they're focusing on online content and typically in video form that's a little bit shorter. So free, hundreds of videos available for all experience levels, just designed to introduce specific concepts about improving your genealogy research skills. So great place to go if you're looking for education for free. And then there is that enormous handout that I shared the link to at the beginning, and I will post it again. And I want to go through the contents of that handout. So in the handout, normally when we give this program in person, and I hand out a huge packet of papers, I had to combine those into a single packet, PDF packet for this purpose. So it has a page on steps for getting started on your family history research. It has kind of a quick start guide to using Ancestry.com. It has a list of databases that the library offers. It also has a list of websites that we recommend beginners take a look at when getting started. It has a list of places you can look for webinars, some of them free and some of them paid. It has an overview of those charts and forms that we talked about at the very beginning, and then it has examples of those charts and forms that you can print off. You can reach Local and Family History if you have any questions about doing genealogy research or anything that we can help with. At our email address is local.history@sjcpl.org. Thanks so much for coming. Again, you have our contact information there, and we hope you'll come see us at the library, and we're always happy to help with your research.